righty. We're going to be Exodus 20. That's not the right thing there. This is... A couple of you may have gotten a sheet this morning. I don't know that we're going to get to that, so you can just hold on to it till next week. I didn't intend to pass them out necessarily unless we get to it. But we might get to it. Who knows? We'll see. So Exodus 20. Let's go ahead and pray, and we'll get started then this morning. Father, thank you for your goodness to us. Lord, thank you for the sign that we can study your word together. Please bless our time. Help us to understand your word. And Lord, I pray that you'd work in our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so Exodus 20, we have Moses receiving the law. Actually, the Lord speaking the law to the children of Israel. We looked at this some last week. Beginning with verse number 1, God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. So, to begin with, the Lord declares his ownership, essentially, of the children of Israel. They belong to him. He has redeemed them. To redeem means to purchase. And so he redeemed them out of Egypt. They have become his people. Now, the issue here is not necessarily going from slavery to complete absolute freedom in the sense like we might think of freedom, but it's going from slavery to the Egyptians to essentially being slaves of God. That's what it is, and that's the analogy that we have in the New Testament. We're God's servants. We're his slaves. We're not free agents in that sense that we get to make decisions for ourselves. We are free from bondage to one master, sin, and bondage in a sense to another master, which is actually true liberation, and that's to the Lord Jesus Christ. We are his slaves. And so this is what's happening with the children of Israel. They were slaves in Egypt. Now they have been purchased to be God's servants, his slaves. And so they are to obey him. He has redeemed them. He is the Lord over them, and that's what he's declaring here, and that's why he can give this law to them. These are my terms. This is what I expect of you as my servants. Verse 3, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So I'm first and foremost. That's what he's declaring. In fact, these first 4 commandments fall under the heading of when Jesus says, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. He says, and then your neighbor as yourself. The law can be divided into 2 sets, or kind of break into 2 parts. One dealing with how we love God with all our heart. The other being how we love our neighbor as ourselves. These first 4 commandments deal with how we love God. And first and foremost is we have no other gods before him. That he is number 1. He is the only one, in essence. Then you shall not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me. Now, he's not against having pictures. He's not against having like little pottery things of birds and various things like that. That's not what he's talking about. The issue here is to make an image of something that you intend to be an object of worship and adoration. That's the issue here. So, if somebody had a statue of themselves, I don't know why somebody would want a statue of themselves apart from wanting to venerate it, I guess, or have people venerate it. But suppose you had a statue of yourself. That wouldn't necessarily be wrong as long as the motivation was right for it. It wouldn't be wrong to have a statue of a squirrel or something, put something in your yard or whatever. That's not what he's talking about. But if your intention of making it is to use that as an object of worship, that this is a representation of God for us, then he says, don't do that. Don't make anything that you think looks like me. That's the issue. I think this goes along, too, with, people like to put up pictures of Jesus. how does anybody know what Jesus looks like? And was somebody going around the shores of Galilee with a camera or a paintbrush and just kind of sketching this thing out or taking pictures of the life of Jesus? No, nobody knows what Jesus looks like, for one. Most of the pictures that you see are entirely accurate because they picture a long-haired, effeminate European man as opposed to a Jew in the Middle East, who was a carpenter, who by no stretch of the imagination was effeminate. He was a very strong man. And Jesus, the Bible even tells us, was not even attractive in any way to look at him. If you saw him, you'd be like, yeah, that's not the guy we want for our king. That we don't want that guy in front of us. I remember my youth pastor growing up. He was working for a company on an assembly line, and it was around the time when Bill Clinton was first getting elected for office. And there was he was a younger man at the time, and there were some older ladies working on the line, and they were talking about how they were going to vote for Bill Clinton. And he's like, what in the world are you going to vote for him for? He stands for this, 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 and this. They're like, yeah, we know, but he's so attractive. We would rather look at him than the other guy. Nobody would have said that about Jesus. So, I don't think people should have him. We won't have him. I don't want that image in my mind when I pray or think about the Lord of what he might look like. Nobody knows. Okay? So we don't make images of what we think God looks like. We can't do that. He says not to bow down to them or serve them. And then he comes down here to verse number 7, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And we usually look at that as being, using his word as a swear word, but to take his name in vain actually means accepting his name. We call ourselves Christians. That's taking the Lord's name. Now, you're taking the Lord's name in vain if you're a Judas. If you are an apostate, if you're not truly a believer, you are taking his name in vain. Now, certainly, it includes using his name in a vain way, but the way the Scripture applies this phrase is in reference to receiving that name upon yourself. So, if the children of Israel were to call themselves God's people, that would be taking his name in vain if they are not following his laws and doing what he says. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. He says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So God intended that every Saturday, and it would go from evening the night before, so Friday night, 6 p.m.-ish, sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday night, that was the Sabbath. And there was no work to be done. And it's really interesting because there's people today that think that we're supposed to observe the Sabbath day. You have the Seventh-day Adventist. There's people that call themselves Hebrew Israelites, and there's these another group. They call themselves Messianic something or other, but they think that we're supposed to observe all the laws of the Old Covenant. The problem with that is, with the Sabbath day, you are not allowed to have a fire. Okay? You're not allowed to start a fire in your house at all. In fact, a man was, later on we'll read about, a man who was out gathering sticks to light a fire on the Sabbath day, and they stoned him for it. You're not allowed to work on the Sabbath day at all. You're not allowed to have a fire in your house. Now let me ask you this. If you turn on a light, what does that require somewhere else? That requires somebody else to be working. You start your car, what's going on in your car? Fire. You're starting a fire on the Sabbath day. And now, you see, with the children of Israel, God provided a double portion of food on Fridays with the manna. He provided a double portion of food on the Friday so they wouldn't have to go out and collect it on the Saturday. It was the only time of the week that he did that. It was the only time of the week that they were allowed to have food go from one day to the next. Otherwise, it would rot and mold and stuff like that immediately if they tried to keep it. But not on Friday. Friday, God would give them a double portion, and they could have it Saturday, so they didn't have to work. That's not going to work in Michigan. Try that in the wintertime in Michigan. You're not allowed to have fire in your house. I asked that an acquaintance of mine. He follows this whole thing. I said, how does that work in Michigan? Don't you have to have a fire at some point during the year on the Sabbath in Michigan? He said, well, now if you want to get technical about things, well, it's just what it says. You see, these laws, and we'll talk about this eventually, either this week or next week, but these laws were intended for the children of Israel in the land of Israel. That's the only way you can keep these things. So do we keep the Sabbath when it's Saturday in Israel or when it's Saturday here? Which one? Does it matter? Well, I think it matters. What about the feast? There's a lot of these things that we have to keep in mind. There's a lot more than just, Saturday's a day of worship. No. There's a whole lot that went along with that the Lord's going to explain for them. He says, 6 days you shall labor, do all your work. Now, I think it is a good principle to have at least one day in 7 where you rest. That's a good day. Our bodies are designed for that. I don't know about you, but I get done on Sunday, and it's like, man, I'm just ready to crash. And it's not just because I've been preaching. It's like I've been going all week, and my body's ready for a break. Our bodies are naturally that way, that, you can only work so many days, and it's like you've got to take a break at some point. And God designed our bodies for that. In fact, Jesus is going to tell us the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So while we don't observe the Sabbath per se, there's still that principle, I think, that applies of taking one day in 7 as a day of rest, where we separate ourselves from our regular labor and toil to give our body a break, to do things that are good for other people and stuff like that. Notice here, verse number 12. Honor thy father and mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Shalt not bear false witness. Now notice verse 17. Thou shalt not covet. What does it mean to covet something? To desire. Now, this is not a prohibition against coveting of itself. It's a prohibition about coveting other people's things that belong to somebody else. And that's what he says. You're not to covet your neighbor's house, their wife, their servants, their ox or their ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. That's the prohibition here. You're not to desire something that belongs to somebody else. This commandment right here, I think, the reason it's last is not because it's least important, but because it's foundational to all the rest of them. Why would somebody steal something? Because they're coveting something that doesn't belong to them. Why would somebody commit adultery? It's because they're coveting something that doesn't belong to them. And this is foundational for all these other things. Why would somebody leave the worship of the true God for the worship of another God? Because they want something that they don't believe this God is going to give them. So this covetousness is really the foundation for all of these things. It gets right to the very heart. And so when we come into the New Testament, while Jesus is kind of, he's changing the law, this principle still applies, because he comes down to, the law says not to commit adultery, but I'm telling you not to look with lust. He says, you're not to commit murder, but I'm telling you, if you hate your brother in your heart, you're committing murder. So Jesus is going right to the heart. Jesus is going right to this last commandment, and he's going to apply it across the board, that it goes to the heart. Now, a question was brought up last week, and it's a great question as I was looking at it this week. I'm glad the question didn't get asked in class last week, and I had a chance to look this up. Because it actually was really interesting as far as how far this goes. Notice here in chapter 20, verse 18. So in the 17 verses there, God's giving the people the 10 Commandments. Now watch what it says here. This is fascinating. And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar. And they said unto Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said unto the people, Fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that ye sin not. Exodus 20:20. Verse 21, the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was. Now I want you to notice here, so the question, if I'm recalling correctly, was, when did this happen in particular? Did the people hear when God gave the Ten Commandments? And how much of this did they hear? What exactly is going on here? So what happens is the people hear the Ten Commandments, but then they realize this is too much for us. We need somebody to intercede on our behalf. And so when Moses goes up, he speaks to God. Actually, if we back up here, let's look here. Verse 20 says, the Lord came down, chapter 19, verse 20. Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount, and the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go down, charge the people, lest they break through unto the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. And let the priests also, now that's an interesting expression here, because the Levitical priesthood has not yet been set up. So who would the priests be? This would be the heads of the households, who were the priests for their house until the Levitical priesthood was established. So let the priests also, which come near to the Lord, sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break forth upon them. And Moses said unto the Lord, The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for thou chargest us, saying, Set bounds about the mount and sanctify it. And the Lord said unto him, Away, get thee down, and thou shalt come up, thou and Aaron with thee. But let not the priests and the people break through to come up unto the Lord, lest he break forth upon them. So Moses went down unto the people and spake unto them. So here's what happens. Moses comes down the mountain, tells people, stay back. And then, verse 1 of chapter 20, God spake all these words. And so Moses is down with the people, and now the people see the lightnings, they hear the thunderings, they hear this loud trumpet blast that, as you read through chapter 19, is just getting louder and louder and louder. And God is thundering out these 10 commandments. And when the last word is spoken, people are like, we can't handle this. We can't handle this. And it says, the people saw it, and you notice the end of verse 18 there, chapter 20. They removed and stood afar off. This whole event of them seeing this and hearing this is exactly what God wanted. This was the response God wanted. In chapter 19, if we go back, I'm sorry, I know I'm having you go back and forth a lot. Verse number 3. Chapter 19, verse 3. Let's look at what God says about this. It says, Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. Now, drop down to verse number 6. Ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. And Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, All that the Lord hath spoken will we do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. So at this point, Moses is going in between, right? Moses is receiving a message from God. He's delivering it to the people. The people speak to Moses. Moses goes up, delivers it to God. Now, verse 9. And the Lord said unto Moses, Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and believe thee forever. And Moses told all the words of the people unto the Lord. Okay? Now, so the purpose here, God is going to speak. They're going to, this whole event is so that the people will believe Moses and realize we have to have Moses perform the task that Moses is going to perform as our lawgiver and our intercessor. Now watch. Verse number 11. He says, "Be ready against the third day, for the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai, and thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves that ye go not up into the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever toucheth the mount shall be surely put to death. There shall not an hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through. Whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. When the trumpet soundeth long, they shall come up to the mount." So they're going to gather together around the mount, but God says very clearly, there's a boundary here. You may not come close enough to be able to touch this mountain. If somebody accidentally touches it, if an animal touches it, that's it. You're to stone them. Shoot them through. Whatever it is, they're going to die. You don't do this. Stay back. That's the intention. Now, when we come to chapter 20, and the children of Israel hear God speak, verse 18, at the end of the verse says, "They removed and stood afar off." That's exactly the point. That's the whole point. That's why God did this. This is why God allowed them to hear everything that he was saying, is so they would realize we cannot approach God like Moses can. And so Moses now is going to be the intercessor. So the whole point was to strike a healthy fear of God. Now, their fear may have gone a little bit too much at this point, because now they're just plain terrified. And so Moses tells them there in verse 20, "Fear not, for God is come to prove you, that his fear may be before your faces, that ye sin not." And so now they have a healthy fear. Now, is this fear going to last? No, it's not going to last very long at all. In fact, once we're not going to get too far from this, and they're going to be breaking all of these commandments at one time. So it's not going to last. But the point here is to strike that healthy fear, and for them to realize that Moses is God's intended intercessor for them. That he is going to be the go-between between them and God. Somebody has to stand in the gap for them, because they can't approach God and live. Only Moses can go between them and communicate God's message to them. Now, this is important. We're going to see this. This is where we see that Moses is like a type of Christ. And Moses is going to make this same parallel. If we go to Deuteronomy chapter 18. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 18. And we're going to come back to Exodus. But Deuteronomy Deuteronomy 18, verse 15. The Lord thy God, verse 15 here, the Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken, according to all that thou desirest of the Lord thy God in Horeb, in the mount of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, neither let me see this great fire anymore, that I die not. So, what was the deal at Horeb? That's Exodus chapter 20, when they're at Mount Sinai. That's Horeb. They're on the mountain, they're at the mountain, they hear God speak, and they say, no, we can't listen to this anymore. Moses, you have to go and receive from God and tell it to us. We can't listen to him directly anymore, or we're going to die. We have to have an intercessor. And this is exactly what Moses is saying. There's coming a day where another man is going to be risen up, a prophet like me that God's going to give you, and he's going to do the exact same thing. He's going to be the go-between, just like you wanted for me to be. He's going to be the go-between between you and God. And then he says, Lord said unto me, verse 17, They have well spoken that which they have spoken. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I command him. And it shall come to pass, that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. Okay? So God, this is a prophecy of Jesus, is what this is. God says, I'm going to send him. He's going to be the go-between, and you're going to have to listen to him too. And if you don't listen to him, I'm going to require it of you. And what does that mean? That means you're going to be destroyed. You're going to be destroyed. Now, let's go to Hebrews. Book of Hebrews. Near the end of the New Testament. Hebrews chapter 12. Now, part of Hebrews is Paul. I think Paul is the one who wrote the book of Hebrews. Hebrews, the point here is to compare and contrast Christ with the law and everything in the Old Testament. Jesus is better than the Levitical priesthood. Jesus' new priesthood is better. Jesus' law is better. Jesus' covenant, the new covenant, is better than the old covenant. Jesus as an intercessor is better than the intercessory of the Old Testament. And so the point that he's making here is that Jesus is better than Moses. Now he's made this point a couple times, but he's insinuating that here. Verse 18. Chapter 12, verse 18. Ye are not come unto the mount that might be touched, and that burned with fire, nor unto blackness and darkness and tempest. Now what's he talking about? He's talking about Exodus chapter 19 and 20, back when Moses was receiving the law, and they saw God descend down, and there was the fire, and there was the blackness, and there was the great sound of a trumpet, and a physical mountain that could be touched that they were not allowed to touch. It says, the sound of a trumpet, the voice of words, which voice they that heard entreated that the words should not be spoken to them anymore. Now watch this here. For they could not endure that which was commanded. Essentially, they couldn't stand to hear it anymore, is what the point is. They couldn't stand to hear it anymore. It became too much. And he says, and, quoting from Exodus, and if so much as a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned or thrust through with a dart. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. But ye, notice verse 22, but ye are come unto Mount Sion. So instead of Sinai, it's Mount Sion, which is Jerusalem, but it's not the earthly Jerusalem. Unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, he says, and to the innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn which are written in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the what? Mediator. He's an intercessor. He's a mediator between God and man for us. That's the point. He is performing in fulfillment exactly what Moses was a type of under the law. To Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel. Now, Abel was the first one to have the practice of offering sacrifices. That's recorded. He was a prophet. His sacrifices were for the atonement of sin, just like it was under the law. And Jesus' blood speaks better than that of Abel, because the sacrifices had to be repeated over and over and over and over again. Every time a sacrifice was performed and that blood was shed, it was a sign that, yes, sin has been taken care of, but only temporarily. Well, that's nice, but that's still a long shot from what we got from Jesus, because Jesus was one sacrifice that was sufficient for all sin for all time. And so that blood certainly speaks much better things than that of Abel. And so what we find here in Exodus chapter 20, when the people are saying this is all a picture for us of what is going to happen with Jesus. And so the people hear this, they realize we can't handle this anymore. We need a mediator. We need somebody to go between God and us to communicate the message back and forth, because we can't do it on our own. So we have this event here. Now there's going to be some laws. We're just going to briefly cover these. We're not just going to mention some of these. We're going to go over this more in detail later, especially when we get to Leviticus. But we have here, if you notice on page 2 of your notes from last week, if you have it, Exodus continues to record the laws given to the people of Israel. So chapter 21 through the middle of chapter 23 is all about laws regarding relationships. So you have chapter 21, verse 1 there. We have, verse 2. If you buy a servant, a Hebrew servant, after 6 years, you have to release him on the 7th year. You have to release him. He can only be a servant for 6 years. If he comes by himself and then he gets married while he's there, well, then there's some tension here. Okay? What are we going to do? Well, he can choose to stay a slave and remain married, or he can go out, but his wife and any of his children have to stay there if he didn't have them beforehand. And so there's laws regarding all these things. There's laws regarding personal injury. You know, if you hit somebody, if you're in a fight with somebody and you hit them and they die from it, then that's murder. That's how it's going to be treated. We're going to treat that as murder. But then he goes down, if you're working. You know, Elisha had the situation where a man comes to him, he was chopping some wood, and the axe head flew off and hit somebody and killed him. I think that was Elisha. Maybe I'm pretty sure it was Elisha. I know Elisha had an axe head fly off, but I think there was a second instance with that too. And it hit somebody, and they died. So what do you do then? Well, that wasn't premeditated. That was totally an accident. Well, he doesn't totally get off scot-free, so God instituted cities of refuge. They're basically sanctuary cities, only properly used. And what you did is, if somebody died, the family could seek your death until you got to that city of refuge. And once you went to that city of refuge, it was to be determined whether or not it was accidental or premeditated. And if it was accidental, you could continue to live inside of that city until the death of the high priest. And they could not touch you during that time. And then after the death of the high priest, then it was to be forgiven and considered to be done with, justice to be served in that sense. Then we have in the middle of chapter 23 there, he speaks of 3 feasts in particular. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is Passover. The Feast of Harvest, which is Pentecost. That would be a spring feast. It's also referred to as a first fruits, but it's not the first fruits of the harvest. It's the Feast of the First Fruits, because that particular harvest was considered to be the first fruits of the harvests for the year. And so that was Pentecost. And then the Feast of Ingathering, which would take place in the fall, at the Feast of Tabernacles, which was at the end for the wheat harvest. That was the main harvest for the year. And during those 3 feasts, all the children of Israel, all the men, were to gather together at the tabernacle and sacrifice to the Lord and worship the Lord together. Lord also specifically states who can worship, who's going to observe these things, who can worship, how they are to be observed. And then you have the laws concerning making covenants with the heathen. Were the children of Israel supposed to make any covenants with the people of the land when they went in? No agreement whatsoever. They were to remain totally separate from them and get rid of them and eliminate those people. All the stuff that's going on right now in Israel wouldn't be going on had they just listened to God and done what they were supposed to do. It wouldn't be going on today. But now I want you to notice here, verse 24, chapter 24, and we'll be done here with this then. It says, and he said unto Moses, verse 1, Come up unto the Lord, thou and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship ye afar off. And Moses alone shall come near the Lord. But they shall not come nigh, neither shall the people go up with him. And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord, and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice, and said, all the words which the Lord has said will we do. So they're entering into covenant with Jehovah. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and rose up early in the morning, and builded an altar under the hill, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen unto the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has said will we do, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord hath made with you concerning all these words. So later on, when we come to the New Testament, when we read about the covenant of the law, specifically the covenant is what is written here in chapter 20 through chapter 23. That's the actual covenant itself. Now, that's making a provision now for everything else. We're going to have other commandments come afterwards, but they all build off of what's in the covenant. They're all kind of interpretations and applications of everything that the Lord gave in the covenant here. Any questions on any of that? I don't know if I answered questions or caused questions or whatever. Anybody? Okay. You're dismissed.